Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hello, here I am. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019. Time for yet another show. On to Tuesday, that Tuesdayest day of the week. It's not Monday, so not quite as bad as all that, and we can, I guess, to some extent, trust this day, though we can't do so for Monday, and it ain't Wednesday, I can tell you that much. Wednesday, I have friends and help coming in to help carry the load and discuss all the issues of the day. Whereas today, well, it's like a little bit of a rehearsal for Friday. I'm not down on Tuesdays and Fridays. I cherish Tuesdays and Fridays. It's a good day to explore the train of thought that the day's news articles bring. And also, by the way, sometimes, well, if I have to write my own summary, it's an easier day because there's less to do because I'm summarizing fewer articles. But as Scott has pointed out, it's actually more difficult for him. What do I say? How do I make more than a paragraph about one article about which he spent 2 hours exploring the ins and outs? It's tough. It's tough out there for all of us, but okay, there's plenty to talk about, and I always enjoy the idea that ahead of time that, well, I can go anywhere we want to go, and we can cover any topic we want. We can cover as many as we want. I can run through as many of these articles as possible. Just read the headlines and make a snarky comment about them and move on. But I can never bring myself to do that. And if you're here at this point in the game, it's probably because you actually enjoy that kind of analysis. I don't know what's wrong with you. I don't know what's wrong with me. But we're going to do it again. And for reasons unknown, we think this is a good thing. So let's continue on. Daily Co's Radio is live now. That's what we've been telling you. That's what Bill told you before I even began this. What am I even doing here? Bill should just tell you. It's like the Ukraine investigation. It's not so important that the investigation or that the show happen. It's that the announcement be made, you see. So all the work is really done by the time Bill tells us that Daily Co's Radio is live. Among other things, Kagro X, me, the guy who's got to fill the 2 hours, is finally prepared to reveal that Tuesday is in fact not Monday. See? Already done. Check. Stay tuned for the shocking proof. That I don't have. And that I don't need. Really, honestly. So long as I have a party attached to my political movement which is willing to believe that Tuesday isn't Monday, what's really the point of proving it to anyone? That's where we are today, and maybe that's what we'll explore. And it doesn't, it meshes pretty nicely, actually, with notes that I made yesterday about what to do today. I've not done that ordinarily, but there was so much from our discussion, the turning the Adam Gopnik, or is it Gopnik? Gopnik, no R in that, right? Gopnik article from yesterday. Remember the one, Stop Staying, Impeachment is Political? But it is, but it isn't, but stop saying it because reasons. Some of the reasons I wanted to discuss with you yesterday, we didn't get to it. I felt like we left things on the table, so maybe we'll start there. And it had me, my notes had me leading into, well, should I give away the process or should I just surprise you or / not tell you what the process is and then simply announce that it had been accomplished at the end of the show and you would have no way of knowing or checking. This is a recurring theme for not only for me, but for Donald Trump. Another recurring theme, of course, the frightening similarities between the ways we work, but there are no parallels in our areas of responsibility, so it's okay. Anyway, this does happen a lot, and this too touches on a recurring theme, that this is ongoing, and that for both of us, but the president in particular, we don't suffer from this as much as the president does. We love to try and provide links to our sources to try to prove, ultimately, somewhere along the line, sometimes you have to infer it, that what we're saying has some basis in reality. It's not just something we made up necessarily. Although our theory about how voting evolved as a system, a political system for determining the outcome of collective decision making, that's made up. We got it right out of the movies. We don't even know if they knew what they were doing when they were making the movie. But we got a lot to... we can come back to another of our major themes, the lack of paperwork or the refusal to file any paperwork among the operatives right up to the top, including President Trump in the Trump administration. We've got more stories about Trump and paperwork, man, and how none of it's ever been proven. But we'll start with the theory by jumping back into into Pocket and where we left things yesterday. I left out in Pocket without archiving the Gopnik story, just so I could remind everybody of where we stood on that, except now it's buried under so many other interesting ideas that I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it all that quickly. But just to remind you of what we were talking about generally, it was basically the idea here that, the idea that impeachment was an imperative in all of this. Here we are. Stop saying that impeachment is political. This was the Adam Gopnik piece. We'll look at the original. It was in the New Yorker. The paragraph of most interest to me was, let's see, where did we find it? Down here. The idea, one, that the impeachment that the founders had in mind when they were writing the Constitution was that of the first Governor General of India, who was certainly not the first, but at that point was contemporaneously arguing that as the Crown's appointee to wield executive power in India, it was his right to basically act unfettered, that he had been handed the power of the Crown and he could claim all of that arbitrary power to act without any system of law or procedure to constrain him. Not that that was the king's intention necessarily, nor was it the intention in Parliament at the time even to give the king unfettered power and no system of law or procedure to constrain him. That was the emerging Enlightenment idea, that there was somewhere along the line, anyway, some necessary element of consent of the governed. But the part that really struck me was the idea that impeachment was not a substitute for politics, but rather a guarantee, essentially, of the principles of law and duty that make politics possible. That is, the duty and principles of law which make it possible to believe that you can settle issues via politics as opposed to via war, right? And I think I even, after the show was over, I tried, as I sometimes do, to clarify things through a couple of tweets. There are things on my mind that I thought, oh, well, maybe I can clarify them for the listeners, and for those who missed the show, you can follow along with that train of thought. And let's see, I definitely tucked them into the Twitter stream at some point immediately after the show, and now it's more difficult than I believed was possible to actually find the things. Then I can follow my notes into the other stories that I wanted to share with you. Yes, here we are. Just recapping yesterday. Politics is how we make collective decisions instead of simply killing the other stakeholders, right? I want to expand Social Security. Now, how do we get to that point? Well, we have to have operative politics in order to get there. But let's say the collective assumption that politics is the way we ought to settle things is now on the bubble, on the chopping block, to make the analogy even clearer. And I want to expand Social Security coverage. The Republicans don't. And I can't get enough of them to vote okay on it. Let's say we'll take the current situation. It's not going to pass the Senate, right? So what do we do about that? Well, we either chalk it up as a loss and say, let's campaign for more seats in the Senate, more Democrats in the Senate, people who believe in the expansion of Social Security generally, and see how it goes. We'll see what happens, that sort of politics. Or one other option in the real world. We like to rule this one out for various reasons, but the other option is kill all of the Republicans, or enough of them, in the Senate, and any who might come to replace them, and any who might, enough of those who might object to our new program of killing all the Republicans. Now, I wouldn't endorse such a program. After all, we're looking to expand Social Security and guarantee their economic well-being. Why do we want to kill them? Well, isn't it really best for everyone in the end? Don't the ends justify the means? No. But if you thought that, you might decide, well, maybe the thing to do here is to kill enough of them and keep killing enough of them such that we, quote unquote, win the vote in the Senate. Seems like a bad idea on its face, but that is another alternative. Anyway, politics is how we make collective decisions instead of simply killing all the other stakeholders so that you end up being the only people standing. It works as a way of making collective decisions because we all agree that it's better than a constant state of war, right? We, rather than constantly be on your guard, I might be wiped out as a political maneuver at any given time. The hard-fought victories that we won by killing the other side could be taken from us at any point by being killed by some third faction or retaliation from the first faction. Bad, not really productive. You can't put all your energies into, say, growing the economy when you're constantly on your guard against political elimination. Anyway, Trump, though, even though we all agree it's better than a constant state of war, Trump insists, he's found the seam here. Trump insists that this mutual agreement just isn't persuasive to him. Yes. You all think that it's better than a constant state of war. I even agree that it's better than a constant state of war, but I know how much you prefer it to a constant state of war. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the envelope, so to speak. And people think that, that's a legitimate political exercise sometimes. And I guess sometimes it is. But if the way you're pushing is, well, I know that if I push this way and I refuse to acknowledge the rules, the boundaries by which we conduct our politics and keep it out of the realm of war in this country. In other words, if I dare you to resort to war to stop me, then your only alternative is war. And if we all agree that war is a terrible state to be in, we'll be reluctant, just based on that, to stop him. So Trump insists that this mutual agreement doesn't persuade him. He doesn't believe we'll bring the powers of war to bear against him, especially as he knows we have other alternatives in between simply voting for our representation and eliminating our political opponents physically. We have impeachment in there, and that's what we'll get to. Trump insists that this mutual agreement isn't persuasive to him and that he'll do whatever he wants until someone stops him, whether through impeachment or war. Now, impeaching him is the way that we get to object to his insistence that he can't be stopped without agreeing to his equally stupid and terrible terms. That the only way we can stop him is physically. Arresting him, detaining him, eliminating him, right? That's his proposition. He knows that we're not going to want to go that way. Luckily, we do have this other mechanism, simply saying, well, we don't have to listen to you anymore. You're not president anymore. That's the way we object to his saying, I get to do whatever I want and you can't stop me, without actually having to resort to war, right? So impeaching him is the way we object to his insistence that he can't be stopped without agreeing to his terms, which would require, by his own measure, the use of force, whether that's imprisoning him or killing him. Impeachment, therefore, and in my estimation, is mandatory, unless, of course, your preference is to endorse an immediate escalation right past that up to war. No one wants to do that, least of all in a morning radio program. But that's kind of where I left it yesterday. There was a little more discussion about various side notes, but then I thought, okay, maybe a good way to follow all of that up would be to go with the equally theoretical work, most recent work, from Adam Serwer. That's usually a pretty good idea in general, even if you haven't set the table for it. That is in the Atlantic at the moment, unless he's snuck another one by me, and he may have. And as a matter of fact, I saw him, the thing that reminded me that I needed to do this was I saw him on Twitter today responding to a National Review piece that appeared to be criticizing. Yes, okay, it was in fact this Atlantic piece that it was taking up and criticizing. And Adam's already responded, which is helpful, so that we don't lose, we don't even have to rely on our own train of thought. But if we didn't do that, what kind of show would it be? All right, so I just wanted to make sure that we were talking about the same article here. So in the Atlantic, Trump's crime against America. At last, someone is going to define this for us. We've all had a pretty good idea what that crime was. We've done a pretty good job of defining it and discussing it here. But we'll check our work by asking Adam Serwer, what is that crime? This is a November 22nd piece, which is what led me to hedge about whether or not this was his most recent. It still may not be, but it's the one we're discussing. So we'll go forward with it from here. Over the past 2 weeks, and now 3 weeks, because this is an older article, maybe even more, a parade of sober and coldly furious civil servants has come forward to testify before Congress about President Donald Trump's decision to withhold congressionally approved aid to Ukraine. An important point. Take note of it. We'll come back to it later. I've been tweeting about that this morning. Note to self. I can't believe I am writing down in my notes, Matt Gaetz needs some addressing today, but only in the negative, so don't worry about that. So, there we are. This parade of sober and coldly furious civil servants has come forward to testify before Congress about President Donald Trump's decision to withhold congressionally approved, I'm underlining, aid to Ukraine. Acting U.S. Ambassador, I even gave it the same emphasis. Acting U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, emphasized that, quote, the security assistance we provide is crucial to Ukraine's defense, invoking the sacrifice of Ukrainian soldiers fighting Russia. True. Yes, he's right about that. He did do that. Kurt Volker, the former special envoy to Ukraine, testified that, quote, the stakes for the United States in a successful Ukraine could not be higher, unquote. The former national security aide, Tom Morrison, emphasized that, quote, Ukraine is on the front line of a strategic competition between the West and Vladimir Putin's revanchist Russia, unquote. There's more. Former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, testified that a secure, democratic, and free Ukraine serves not just the Ukrainian people, but the American people as well. Okay, very important, and in sequence, or even out of sequence, they make the very important point that, yes, America really does have reason to care what's going on in Ukraine. One of the Republican excuses in all of this to try to sweep it all under the rug is, hey, who cares what happens in Ukraine anyway? At the extreme, maybe not even the extreme. I mean, I assume that there's someone even more extreme out there than this, but at or near one extreme at the moment is Tucker Carlson, who has, we mentioned this last week, and he has since reiterated that his position is, hey, why should I care who wins in a war as between Russia and Ukraine? In fact, I'm actively rooting for Russia here. It's his belief, I guess, that for whatever reason, people will follow him in this thinking. It doesn't matter to Americans somehow who wins this war. And it owns the libs to say that I'm pro-Russia, so I'm going to say that I'm pro-Russia. I don't even know that he has any real idea whether or not he actually believes it or whether or not he thinks. I doubt very much that he can name a benefit of Russia winning that war to us. Republicans, Democrats, pro-Trump, anti-Trump. I don't think that there's any particular advantage to having Russia win that war unless you are, I mean, well, I guess if you're a one of those weird creatures, the transnational white nationalist, right, then you can't really point up any sort of particular benefit. So I think he's doing it mostly as a trolling option, but he may also likewise be a transnational white supremacist. That's entirely possible. It's consistent with the positions he's taken on everything else. All right, but back to Adam here. Republicans and Trump defenders have sought to cast the impeachment inquiry as an effort to criminalize a policy dispute. That is a familiar refrain to those of us who have not only just listeners to the show, but people who have been hanging around the daily corners of the internet for a long time, discussing these things with me for a long time, and reminding you that it's a favorite refrain of Republicans. When they're caught doing something to undermine our political norms and to press their electoral advantage to the detriment of our political system, separation of powers, the division between, for self-dealing purposes, the division of, or anti-self-dealing purposes, the division between political action and policy action. Every time they're caught doing this, they say, all you're doing here is you're just trying to criminalize politics, which is, of course, actually what they're trying to do right now. The idea that what Joe Biden did in Ukraine by way of seeing that the corrupt prosecutor Shokin was fired in furtherance of the consensus view of the West, by the way, as we all know, that somehow is creating criminal liability on his part, is in fact more corruption itself. That all grows from the idea that this too is projection. They are attempting to criminalize Biden's politics and little more. All right. Let's see. Oh, by the way, comments along the way here from Mitchell Hirsch pointing out that I guess you're talking about Tucker Carlson here. I'd say he does realize it and he's picked the other side. Russia. Hashtags aid and comfort. Hashtag treason. I mean, that's where you end up once you realize what he's doing. I'm just not sure that he cares what the reason is. I guess more so than that he even knows what the reason is. Let's see. We'll continue on. I have another comment here from Mike Musson. I think it probably fits in a different part of the discussion. But continuing with what Adam had said here, right? The Republican defenders have sought to cast the impeachment inquiry as an effort to criminalize a policy dispute. And like I said, Republicans have used this excuse for almost everything. When we caught them, for instance, my last recollection of their frequent use of this refrain was, and there's probably been times in between, but one that comes to mind when we caught them politicizing the Department of Justice last time, which is something they're doing now, currently, which is, of course, part of the reason for my frustration with certain elements of the Obama administration, including the guy it was named after, when I was pretty explicit with, again, my then unproven theory that not holding Republicans from the previous administration and the supporters of the previous administration to account would result in the next Republican administration simply picking up where the last one left off and continuing with the same policies, only worse. And indeed, that is exactly what happened. It doesn't make it any easier to know what to have done with precision from 2009 through 2017, but it does point up a problem that we had. Anyway, when they were politicizing the Justice Department last time, it manifested itself in the U.S. Attorney's scandal. The effort inside the DOJ to replace all U.S. attorneys, even Republican-appointed U.S. attorneys, if they wouldn't agree to toe the line and then go a step further, for instance, in criminalizing politics, finding ways to prosecute political opponents, Democrats, within their jurisdictions, such that Democrats would find themselves discredited electorally in those districts. That was the point of the Attorney General's scandal. It is the same point as what they're trying to do now with Biden and Ukraine. Discredit and criminalize the activity of political opponents such that you are in position to accuse them of being corrupt, being a criminal, being the sort of person no sane voter would ever cast their ballot for, because we don't vote for criminals in this country except for the one we have now, Donald Trump, and all the other criminals that we've voted for along the way. Anyway, so just wanted to point that out as a common thread before continuing on. Trump's attempt to coerce a foreign country to frame a political rival was, quote, inappropriate, misguided foreign policy, in the words of Texas Republican Will Hurd, but he insisted he had, quote, not heard evidence proving the president committed bribery or extortion, unquote. So we now approach our first break, which is a good job eating up an entire segment on just this part of the article. But there is more, and we should probably save the expansion of that for after the break and for after my first opportunity to really give the throat a good clearing. I keep doing that in your ear, and I apologize. But just to lay this out one more time before departing on the break, he's done a great job. What he's doing here, of course, is cataloging not only a bunch of Republican excuses for what the president does, but showing what the witnesses so far to date have been able to bring forth by way of explaining why it's bad that this thing was done to Ukraine. And to everyone's chagrin, I think the 538 guys have spent a lot of time trying to point out that maybe that isn't enough to establish a removal. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It's going to be a tough show today. By the way, a little housekeeping note. I am headed back to the doctor to get blood drawn after the show today, which means I'm not supposed to be eating anything, which I guess I should have consulted with Greg on this one. Does it mean you can't take your normal routine of morning vitamins? I mean, they probably frown on your taking the supplements, but I wasn't sure whether I should take, say, a Claritin in the morning, which usually makes it possible to get through the show without suffocating. I think I'll probably make it this time. I've done it before, but sometimes it's hard to get through some of the lengthier thoughts and paragraphs without pausing for more breath when you don't take that morning medication. But I probably should have consulted on that beforehand. But we'll suffer through and get the blood drawn, make sure we're not dying of something else in addition to the suffocation caused by the lack of Claritin in the morning. Anyway, let's see. By the way, Mike Musson's comment along the way in our first segment was that Trump's idea of pushing the envelope, remember when I said that he's pushing the envelope of the boundaries of our political system, his idea of pushing the envelope is sliding it across his desk so you can fill it with those sweet, sweet emoluments. That is true. That's probably what he thinks about when he thinks about pushing the envelope. Luckily, he gets caught when he throws it on the floor due to functional blindness and physical prowess. Okay, I think that's probably as likely a way for him to be caught in this as any. Now, back to Adam here, having established, and we drop another hint about the 538 guys and others being taken to task yesterday about on the question of, have you really made a case for removal of the president of the United States by pointing out how bad this is for Ukraine, or even pointing out that it is bad for Ukraine and therefore bad for the United States? And there have been some interesting reminders of that. How did he put it? The cold fury of the civil servants really laid it out nicely. It's not hard to imagine why it's bad for the United States that Ukraine gets screwed over. That's not difficult to figure out. And as a matter of fact, I had put something aside from the weekend that made an excellent point about that, but that's not the key point that Adam's making. And perhaps doesn't matter how good the point is about how bad things are for Ukraine, or even the threat to the larger idea of American national security that's tied up in the Ukraine question for Americans. But it does, it does help clarify one or two points about it. Let's see, where was this one? It was Rachel Bidikofer's point, actually. Is it possible that this one didn't land in Twitter? I can search it up pretty quickly, I would think. But she was pointing out the history, the post-Soviet history of Ukraine, and why it was of particular importance, and why it was particularly almost blasphemous that Trump had done what he did and was demanding that other Republicans do with Ukraine. Let me see. I'll find her tweet about it. Should be pretty quickly to find. Here we are. Just reminding everybody over the weekend that Ukraine, in 1994, post-dissolution of the Soviet Union, held about 1/3 of the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons. They were deployed on Ukrainian soil. And they agreed to forego being a nuclear state. They were brand new as an independent state in the modern sense. And they could have started life immediately as a nuclear power, and a major nuclear power at that. But they agreed not to do that. It was a big headache. I understand why they would agree to do that. But part of the agreement was, we will forego being a nuclear state in exchange for the United States and NATO agreeing to protect us. We could hold on to this 1/3 of nuclear weapons, but not only would it give us a number of headaches to deal with, but we'd be in a position of having to target them backward from where they had previously been targeted, back at Russia, to use the nuclear arsenal left to us by the dissolution of the Soviet Union to protect ourselves against Russian aggression. That wouldn't be received very well in Russia, and it might very well have sparked a war between them, and the Russians may have taken the Trump position there. We dare you to start a nuclear war with us. You do have a lot of our nuclear weapons. We still have a number of them as well, and we don't believe you'll really resort to them. And we have questions about whether the United States would intervene in that. But the deal was, and it seemed, I guess, to have struck everyone as a relatively good idea, even among the Russians. They didn't love the idea of Ukraine being a breakaway, and a hostile breakaway at that, but they loved the idea of their own nuclear weapons being pointed at them even less. So the deal was, in exchange for U.S. and NATO protection, Ukraine would give up this nuclear arsenal, return some of it to Russia, decommission the rest of it, let us help decommission it. One less nuclear power in the world, good for everybody. But, as she points out, they gave up their nukes, and we agreed to defend them. That was the basic deal. And Trump betrayed that sacred promise. If you might think that's over the top, calling it a sacred promise, but he betrayed that promise to get dirt on his political opponent. That is what that's the deal that was put in place there. You don't have to, desperately retain nuclear weapons and walk that tightrope between the West and Russia and reinforce it with nuclear weapons that could spark a conflict that destroys all of us. It's good for all of us if we get rid of that prospect of conflict. Just, we'll do it if you make sure that we don't fall under Russian dominance thanks to their use of conventional weapons against us, or for that matter, nuclear weapons, if we give up our nuclear weapons. And we said, yes, sure, and Donald Trump, ignorant of all of that, because in 1994, he was busy trying to get laid with porn stars more than anything else. And can I reverse my failing fortunes by coming up with another stupid get-rich-quick scheme that turned out to be take the form of The Apprentice? And yeah, so he did. So his mind was elsewhere, even though 10 years earlier, he had insisted that he was smart and engaged enough in international geopolitics that Ronald Reagan ought to send him to negotiate a nuclear arms reduction treaty. But, well, I guess you can see not only did everybody probably thought that was a bad idea even then. We now certainly know that it would have been a bad idea. And I guess additional proof of this is that despite claiming that he understood the geopolitics of nuclear arms reduction, here he is trashing the geopolitics of nuclear arms reduction in exchange for what might maybe one day become a leg up in an election against Joe Biden. Wow. We have to make great deals. Imagine trading away the nuclear security of the human race for, well, what if Joe Biden wins the primary and I have to run against him and I'm incapable of beating him on the merits? That's what he traded away for. Okay. Very interesting. Just pointing that out. Let's see. All right. Oh, by the way, some advice from Absinthe, which is probably, I don't know if that's a great name if you're a healthcare provider necessarily. But anyway, I don't know whether we're talking to a healthcare provider here, but certainly someone with more knowledge about what to do when an upcoming blood test is on the horizon. So those of you who wanted that thread answered, yes, it depends on what tests they're doing. I don't really know. General, regular, annual blood tests. On if foods, certain fluids, water, etc. are restricted. I was told it was okay for water. The doctor actually said, water, all the water you want, no problem. The place you're going to should have a number to call and confirm. Well, they do. I'm busy. Best to give them a call and make sure it's okay. Well, too late now. We're just going to do the show without Claritin. But I should have thought of that yesterday. So anyway, just in case you were wondering, and you too have skipped breakfast because you're having blood drawn. I guess, after listen to the podcast of the show. You can go and call your doctor now and check on things later. All right. Let's see. Let's head back. I just thought that was an interesting side note from Rachel Bidikofer here. By the way, there's a response here that I didn't see earlier. I'm curious about whether that obviates some of this. Bonnie Resnick had said, there is considerable military cooperation between Ukraine, NATO, and the United States. This I understand. The U.S. and NATO have expressed strong support for Ukrainian sovereignty. Russia did also in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which it is violating. I guess by virtue of their invasion and annexation of Crimea and the ongoing war in the eastern provinces. However, Bonnie continues, the U.S. and NATO have never extended security guarantees to Ukraine. So some doubt about how Rachel is interpreting things here. But I loved the formulation, and I'm willing to go with it by way of even hyperbolic illustration of exactly how big the stakes were even in the unstated agreements, if any, between the West and Ukraine, and how different that is from the pettiness of the stakes as Trump sees them. He's taken an enormously valuable understanding for the entire world and pawned it for peanuts. And that, I mean, if nothing else, it just goes to show you he's got no idea how to make great deals. No one ever really believed, on our side that he had that ability, but whatever. Maybe there's a Republican somewhere who did, and we'll see this and say, wow, that's not a great deal. One guy will change his mind. But I don't know. I thought it was worth pointing out as a historical note. Back to what Adam was doing. He was going in a slightly different direction. The president sets foreign policy. This much is true, right? I guess the transition is a little rough just to pick up there. We were talking about how Republicans and Trump defenders have sought to cast the impeachment inquiry as an effort to criminalize a policy dispute. There was Will Hurd saying, hey, I haven't heard evidence. This is bad foreign policy, but I haven't heard any evidence proving the president committed bribery or extortion. The president sets foreign policy, after all, and perhaps he didn't want to send lethal aid to Ukraine. Except we've actually proven that maybe that doesn't even hold. Anyway, the president's vocal anti-Trump defenders on the left, get it, suggest that perhaps Trump was bucking the bipartisan tradition of Washington imperialism. That's a theory, right? Maybe Trump was genuinely concerned about corruption, a kernel of truth that people can reasonably disagree about whether the U.S. should be involved in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, sort of where Tucker Carlson is, except he actually is affirmatively pro-Russia. That kernel of truth becomes the basis for sweeping dismissal of presidential wrongdoing. We've actually pondered it here on the show, right? It could be considered a legitimate foreign policy position for a chief executive, the president of the United States, to promote the idea of outright, overt political union with Russia, and even less than outright political union with Russia, but an alignment with Russia, that the United States' long-term interests best served by an alliance just outright with Russia and adopting their foreign policy as our own. You could propose that. Now, you might wonder whether or not you had legitimately obtained the consent of the governed for that, but our system is a little weak on that. Anyway, I also don't think that's what's actually going on. But anyway, although the idea of handing over the keys to Russia is something that I do think might actually be going on. But I don't think he's thought it through and decided that that's really a presidential prerogative. That's one of the big problems with nailing this down. And they're using it against us by reminding us, well, you're going to want to nail this case shut at some point. And that means you're going to have to establish Trump's intentions here, and that's going to be difficult to do. It's difficult to do traditionally it's difficult to do because of evidentiary problems. A person smart enough to try to attempt pulling something like this off is usually smart enough not to leave behind the sorts of concrete evidence we usually insist on in simpler cases like conspiracy to commit some routine crime versus the sorts of things that would actually push us to say, yes, those are politics we ought to be criminalizing. But Donald Trump is both a bumbling idiot and might in fact leave behind such evidence, might make a confession to such a motive, and two, doesn't really realize anything about what he's doing and doesn't think about it in terms of setting foreign policy so much as how I'm good at trying to grab onto money or benefits. What money or benefit can I get from this situation without regard to the geopolitical import of what I'm doing? Because I don't understand what geopolitical means, and I don't care. And if everybody in the world dies in a nuclear conflagration, but I don't, that's a good policy outcome. You don't want that guy in charge of foreign policy, especially acting arbitrarily, right? Remember, again, important word. All of these arguments, ranging from the weak to the false, obscure the core reason for the impeachment inquiry. Now we're getting into it with Adam here, which is that the Trump administration was engaged in a conspiracy against American democracy. Right? Now here you can forget about Ukraine and what side Tucker Carlson wants to win, or whether or not we were pursuing open political union with anybody. Fearing that the 2016 election was a fluke in which Trump prevailed only because of a successful Russian hacking and disinformation campaign, and a last-minute intervention on Trump's behalf by the very national security state Trump defenders supposedly loathe, Trump and his advisors sought to rig the 2020 election by forcing a foreign country to implicate the then Democratic frontrunner in a crime that did not take place, or indeed might never have been a crime in the first place. If the American people could not be trusted to choose Trump on their own, Trump would use his official powers, problem, to make the choice for them, problem. Right? See what he's identifying here. It was, in short, a conspiracy by Trump and his advisors to keep themselves in power. Easy to understand. The exact scenario for which the framers of the Constitution devised the impeachment clause. This scheme was carried out by Trump-appointed officials and by the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, running a corrupt back channel aimed at, in his words, meddling in an investigation. And it came very close to succeeding. Maybe. As Brian Beutler writes, always important to know, had the whole scheme not come to light in a whistleblower complaint, and Trump not released his hold on aid to Ukraine, we might have awakened one morning to a blaring CNN exclusive about international corruption allegations against the Democratic presidential frontrunner and his party. They would, of course, seek to expand it to all Democrats. That was the goal of what was going on here, right? As the Trump-appointed U.S. ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, testified, when he testified Wednesday before last, Ukraine's president, Vladimir Zelensky, quote, had to announce the investigations. He didn't actually have to do them, as I understood it. And as the U.S. official David Holmes told the House Intelligence Committee, Sondland had told him that Trump was merely concerned about, quote, big stuff that benefits the president, like the quote-unquote Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was pushing. And the words quote-unquote are actually part of Holmes's quote there, by the way. This point is crucial. Did you hear it? This point is crucial. Trump was not concerned about corruption in Ukraine. You know that. His own Pentagon and State Department had certified that Ukraine had taken sufficient steps to root out corruption. Nor was Trump particularly interested in an actual investigation of Joe and Hunter Biden. What he wanted was a public accusation that he could use to cripple a political rival's aspirations. Trump was not defying the bipartisan war lobby in an effort to extricate the U.S. from foreign entanglements. And he was not engaged in a dispute over policy with unelected bureaucrats pursuing their own agenda, because he was fundamentally uninterested in the policy in question, except in that it might be exploited to benefit him personally. Trump saw an opportunity to strong-arm a weaker country into helping him win re-election. He abused his presidential authority to coerce it into doing so. And then he and his advisors sought to hide what they had done in order to maximize the public impact of the conspiracy. This plot, spearheaded by Giuliani, has already drawn credulous coverage from sympathetic reporters and would likely have succeeded had the anonymous whistleblower not registered a complaint exposing the scheme on September 9th, which forced the Trump administration to release the aid to Ukraine on September 11th. A president who was genuinely opposed to U.S. entanglement in Ukraine, concerned about corruption, or involved in an internal struggle with bureaucrats over the ideal policy toward Ukraine, would not have released the aid, because those concerns would have remained unaddressed. A president defying the bipartisan war lobby, seeking to prevent U.S. aid from being misused, or seeking to develop a better Ukraine policy, would have had no reason to be concerned by the complaint. But the aid was released because a corrupt scheme to defraud the American people had been exposed, and so withholding it served no further purpose. In fact, in Trump's stupid, dim-witted mind, he thought would erase the possibility that he could be held responsible for any of it. Look, the money went, so no harm, no foul. Trump's defenders, having previously insisted that there was no quid pro quo involved in the president's effort to extort Ukraine using taxpayer dollars, are slowly shifting to insisting, as much of the president's base already believed, that Trump did nothing wrong. This is of a piece with the general anti-democracy trend in the Republican Party, which justly fears that the majority of the country no longer supports its agenda, and that extreme measures must be taken to shield its grip on power from democratic accountability. Accountability is the key word there, by the way. Not that we'll exercise any of it. We'll just celebrate having won at the end and figure that we'll never be back in these dark days ever again until another Republican wins. The Republican Party has responded to the increasing diversity of the electorate with an accelerating intolerance for ethnic and religious minorities, and with elaborate schemes to disenfranchise rival constituencies and rig election rules to its disadvantage, which I would point out, by the way, is just another form of criminalizing politics. The Republicans usually use that frame when they're pointing at Democrats and say, oh, Democrats have caught us in some unconventional arrangement that takes us outside of political norms, that wields official power for personal benefit, replacing all U.S. attorneys who won't prosecute with an eye toward giving Republicans an electoral advantage, is, of course, using the presidential prerogative to appoint U.S. attorneys for personal benefit, the political gain, or basically rigging things such that Republicans retain power. But by the way, it's similar in these, as he says, elaborate schemes to disenfranchise rival constituencies and rig election rules to its advantage. How do you disenfranchise rival constituencies? There are a couple of methods. We discussed them at the top of the show. One is you could kill all of the rival constituencies. The other is you could operate in the quote-unquote political realm by defining the franchise such that the other constituencies don't qualify to disenfranchise rival constituencies. When I say rig the, to rewrite the definition of the franchise, what does that mean? Well, that's political activity. We were changing the legal code such that the power of the state, the coercive power of the state, comes down on people who, quote unquote, violate the law. If I make it illegal for you to vote if you're a Democrat, just bluntly, if you've registered as a Democrat now or ever registered as a Democrat, you lose your right to vote. Is that constitutional? Well, if 5 people say it is, then it is. There is no such thing as constitutional law, as we've pointed out on the show. But if that were the law, and let's say it stands for the moment, right? By way of example, what it would mean is that being a Democrat is against the law. They've criminalized that version of politics to take you out of the equation, to disenfranchise you. Now, all the people, we've let everybody who's qualified to vote got to vote, and what do you know? 100% of them voted for Republicans. Yes, well, we all can see that you disenfranchised 50% of the country. Yet, well, the law is the law, man. And a similar thing going on in the immigration scene, right? Well, it's not that I'm against immigrants. It's that I'm against people breaking the law. You got to come to this country legally. Well, we've made it illegal to come to this country, but insist that people obey the law. Go back to your country and wait, where you will, of course, be murdered. Once again, eliminating the rival political constituencies using this, as a result of the state of war that exists elsewhere. It's the same thing is what I'm saying. Criminalizing politics can take many different forms. And as they are projecting, once again, it's worth thinking about their cries about criminalizing politics probably means that they are busy criminalizing politics. Maybe not in exactly the same way, maybe in some other aspect of politics, but now we've identified it and found it. So, again, back to Adam here. The Republican Party has responded to the increasing diversity of the electorate with an accelerating intolerance for ethnic and religious minorities and elaborate schemes to criminalize politics, disenfranchise rival constituencies, and rig election rules to its advantage. Crucial to this effort is its conviction that the Republican electorate is the only one that can confer legitimacy on elected officials, and that the party's political opponents are no longer wrong, but fundamentally illegitimate, faithless usurpers with no right to determine the direction of the country. This has manifested in the quasi-religious dogma that Trump represents the will of, capitalized, real America, and therefore defiance of his will is itself a form of treason. We've even had more explicit expressions of it even than that. His weirdo spiritual advisor, not that he accepts any spiritual advice, I'm sure, Paula White, we've all seen the film clips circulating from her on Twitter, right? Just pointing out that, look, what did she say? I think where I walk is holy ground. Where, I'm an advisor to the president. That makes the White House holy ground. That means defying the president is defying God's will. She's said as much, with a rhetorical flourish, but in her hayseed way. Anyway, that undermines it in my view. Okay. Oh, look, we're up against break number 2. See, this is going to be an easy summary, isn't it? / more difficult than ever, right? Sorry, Scott. Okay. So we were just finishing up this paragraph here. Believing that Republican officials will be convinced by the evidence proffered by Trump's own staff and political appointees is a mistake. This is actually a new paragraph here. Probably shouldn't have started it. But because the underlying facts are not genuinely in dispute. Oops, wrong music here. That's the one we really wanted. Didn't want to panic anybody here. Trumpists are not operating from an ethical framework that even allows acknowledgement that the president is capable of being guilty. Trump is the nation, and the nation cannot commit treason against itself. On the contrary, it is Joe Biden who is guilty of betrayal, defying the tribune of the people by seeking to run against him. And it is Trump's treacherous staff who convict themselves of treason with every statement that implicates the president. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Just watching some items fly by on Twitter this morning. So yeah, we're going to have to dive right back into this and let Adam continue making his point and thereby giving us fodder to ramble for the rest of the show. But as we left off saying, I had some very interesting points as well. And building on essentially where Paula White was taking him, you got a situation where Trumpists are not operating from an ethical framework that even allows acknowledgement that the president is capable of being guilty. Not because by reason of mental incapacity, though, which is a decent argument. Trump is the nation, and the nation cannot commit treason against itself. On the contrary, it is Joe Biden who's guilty of betrayal, defying the tribune of the people by seeking to run against him. And it is Trump's treacherous staff who convict themselves of treason with every statement that implicates the president. The more evidence of Trump's misdeeds the Democrats uncover, the more they reveal themselves as traitors. For Trumpists, there is no higher patriotism than bending to Trump's will, and no more base corruption than defying it. The impeachment inquiry has revealed the president's personal corruption, but it has uncovered a more abstract one as well. The broken reputations of weak, conniving men litter the Trump era like corpses on a Civil War battlefield. Each of them believed, as some Trump officials currently do, that the president's racism and corruption might be bent toward legitimate ends, and each of them has paid the price for his folly. Yes, he's a racist and he's corrupt, but we might be able to use him to install judges that will give us the things that we want. And so far, that one still has held true. In only one sense have they succeeded. The president's economic populism and his promises not to destroy the welfare state have been replaced with the traditional Republican agenda of providing low taxes for the wealthy and freeing corporations from regulations designed to protect the public from their greed. I would argue the judges there too, but that's also part of the program of, say, freeing corporations from regulations. But the impeachment inquiry shows, it is Trump who has bent the establishment to his will, turning the party of Lincoln into little more than a subsidiary of the Trump Organization, with no higher purpose than executing the president's corrupt schemes and shielding him from the potential consequences. We just heard over the weekend that some alarming percentage of Republicans, maybe even a majority, considered him, according to this poll, to be a better president than Abraham Lincoln himself. The party of Lincoln is now the party of Trump in a very, in a very straightforward sense. They now believe he's the greatest Republican president ever. Why bother calling it the party of Lincoln if there's a better Republican out there? We almost saw that happening with Reagan, but even he's been overshadowed by Trump. Even though, as Adam points out, all that he has, quote unquote, accomplished to date has been done for no higher purpose than executing a bunch of corrupt schemes and then shielding him from the potential consequences. Versus, emancipation, but whatever. That was highly suspect as well. But still, didn't it seem like a bigger deal? Yeah, I think so. The rest of the country, however, should not lose sight of why the president is being impeached, and it is not because of a good faith dispute over Ukraine policy. In fact, I would say it's not even because of a bad faith dispute over Ukraine policy. It's not really over Ukraine policy per se. That's just the vehicle that delivered the betrayal that's supposed to get you impeached. That's the way I think of it. Trump and his advisors conspired to rig the 2020 election on his behalf, scheming to defraud the American people of a free and fair election. A genuine republic cannot survive chief executives who utilize their powers to make anyone who might challenge their authority into a criminal by extorting weaker entities into leveling false charges at their political rivals. And that's important. That's where Ukraine fits in on all this. As important as it is as a foreign policy question and as a question of the legitimate or illegitimate use of the executive power for personal aims, what's really a bigger question here, that's just a minor supporting clause in all this, extorting weaker entities into leveling the false charges. It doesn't have to be Ukraine here. What's going on is the problem being a genuine republic cannot survive chief executives who utilize their powers to make anyone who might challenge their authority into a criminal, no matter how they do it. As it happens, here he has done so by extorting a weaker entity into leveling false charges. But he could just level the charges himself. Actually, that would have been the logical conclusion of people's concerns, even as then expressed, about the ability George W. Bush claimed under various legal directives to be the sole arbiter of declaring who is a non-combatant enemy, or what was it? A ununiformed combatant, can't even remember the terminology that we used. But that you could essentially declare anyone an enemy combatant without any of the usual circumstances that surround or support such a declaration. And in the main, people probably did not believe that that meant, for instance, that if Karl Rove feared a Democratic contender for Senate in, Alabama, let's say, that you could literally declare him an enemy combatant and send him to Guantanamo rather than allow him to stand for election. It was still the logical conclusion of the expansion of those powers. If it was unchecked, then what would prevent a president from doing so? And the answer was plain politics. Well, he would lose election. Well, suppose he suspended those elections. And people certainly thought about that and posited that that could happen. It didn't happen. And it didn't look like the conditions were necessarily developing at the time. But the point was, if the power being claimed was truly unfettered, just as was the case with the claim of powers in the impeachment discussed in the last article. I forget the guy's name already, but the Governor General of India, whose example was being used, or was foremost in mind as the framers designed our own impeachment power, right? If there's literally no limit to it, why couldn't someone make that claim? Why weren't you already outside of the realm of politics? That would be the system that you thought would hold the president or chief magistrate in check, right? That reminds me of another interesting tweet thread that I wonder if I can find the various analogies that somebody was making to the idea of not only unfettered political power, but addressed some of the excuses Republicans were using in the current impeachment crisis to try to dismiss suspicions about what the president has done. They made all sorts of analogies, like to the claim that was being made. I'll have to dig these up now. That we should this was still politics. We should let the next election settle whether or not the president was out of line here. And that's something that Republicans have been proposing for a long time, and in various forms. It's just a variant of the excuse that Mitch McConnell was using to not consider the appointment of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. Well, we need to let the people, we're 1 year out from an election, let the people decide who should be appointing presidents. They had already decided, or rather appointing Supreme Court justices. They had already decided that. The answer was Barack Obama, and that's that. But, you just push the envelope. Here, in this case, this person who was tweeting was making analogies. The idea that you should just let the election decide what we should do about what the president did with respect to rigging the 2020 election and using Ukraine to do it was, I think he gave a sports analogy, but basically being, well, we've cheated in the game here, but rather than punish us, why don't we let the outcome of the game determine whether or not, we should be punished. If we win the game, then we're okay, right? Don't punish us. Whereas if we lose the game, I guess then you could try to do something about it, but it wouldn't matter at that point. But losing sight of the fact that you're cheating now in the game. How can we use the results of this game as an arbiter of whether or not what you did was right if it is itself designed to rig the outcome? You see, I think I probably saw that one from Brian Beutler's response to it. And what was it that he mentioned in his tweet? It was that an election that has Trump on the ballot was by definition not going to be a free and fair election in the first place. Let me see if I can't track that one down while it's fresh in mind, and then nobody has to remind me about it. Let's see. There's Brian Beutler right now, but he's not talking about the same thing. I'll track this down now. Let's see. UTLER. Got to do it out loud. Can't do two things at once when I'm typing. It was one of them. Okay. Anyway. Let's see. I think I can come up with that one. There it is. Yes, he had said there cannot be a free and fair election with Trump on the ballot. You know what? Let me hold on to that because I think we can and should, in fact, conclude finally the Adam Serwer article and then move on from there. We had said, read this part, right? A genuine republic cannot survive a chief executive who utilizes his powers to make anyone who might challenge the authority into a criminal, criminalizing politics. By extorting weaker entities, that was, the less important part of it. Who cares how he criminalizes politics? That, in that sense, Ukraine should have nothing to do with it. Indeed, the Republic's founders foresaw such a circumstance and created the impeachment clause as a last resort against it. And I mean that, last resort. That's not just a turn of phrase. It's the last resort before, what we'll say delicately, the state of war. And if you wanted to get in trouble with the Secret Service, you would say it differently. But as a political science exercise, we will say it would be a state of war would exist between the forces of the purported president of the United States and the rest of us. The high crime that the president has committed is not against Ukraine, but against America. Adam begins his conclusion. This may have little meaning to the minority of Americans who have decided that Trump is the only legitimate vessel of popular will, and that the only legitimate election is one that ends with Trump's victory, but it matters to everyone else. And I think it does. Now, we'll have to return to that last paragraph, I think, is the jumping off point for where he was then being criticized by the National Review. But for just a moment, turning to what Brian Beutler was referring to yesterday when he was saying there cannot be a free and fair election with Trump on the ballot. It wasn't just, hyperbole. He was referring here to the tweet thread, I guess, from does he say Michael? Michael Jolett, Mikel, Jollett. I don't know who he is. I have to take a look. I'm author and musician. Okay. It says author/musician. Hollywood Park is here. And then a link to his, and I never know anybody in pop culture. But anyway, his comment is what I'm interested in. So let's not spend time on the credentials. The craziest thing, he says, about the Ukraine story is that the president already tried to cheat in the 2020 election. It is insane to think we should, quote, let the election decide. Like he's already cheating in that election. And then he goes on to his analogies. Let's try a sports analogy. He says, this is like that time the Patriots, who are cheaters, sorry, Bill, got caught cheating because they cheat, listening in on opponents' teams' plays. Now, imagine that happened during the game and the NFL finds out and was like, let's just let the game decide. All right, that's a good point. Let's try an academic analogy. He goes on to say, this is like if you get caught cheating with a cheat sheet in your AP Spanish class during the test, and then try to tell your Spanish teacher, before you decide to punish me, let's just see how I do on the test. Right? Okay, a gambling analogy. This is like if you got caught dealing off the bottom of the deck during a hand of poker, and instead of getting your ass kicked, you said, wait, but I got 3 aces. Let's see how this hand plays out before you decide whether or not I'm guilty of anything. Can you believe it? One more, I guess. Okay, a business analogy. It's like if you got caught trying to enroll people in a fake university. Now, this is a great way of transitioning to a totally different subject, which we won't do, I think, for once in our lives. But a story I have not yet mentioned, and I know that a lot of you probably are wondering how I could not have gotten to this. Well, we'll let Michael Jolett do it instead. This is like if you got caught trying to enroll people in a fake university, and instead of having to pay $25 million when convicted of fraud, that actually gives me a chance to I should have just cleared my throat for real. But instead we do the formalized ahem. You were like, let's see how far the graduates go with their fake-ass degrees. I don't really love that analogy quite as much, but, or actually a better way would be to say, let's say that you get caught enrolling people in a fake university, and instead of paying your $25 million when convicted, you say, oh, well, actually, I was not only a fake university, but I was a fake law school. And all the graduates are lawyers, and I'm going to make them federal judges. Enough of them that eventually, when my case comes up on appeal, it will be handled by a panel of judges that are fake judges that I appointed myself, and then they won't make me pay the $25 million fine. But that becomes more convoluted. Anyway, one last, I guess, tweet in this thread. I guess he throws in something else, saying, as usual, the plumb line nails it. Greg Sargent, I guess, or, well, I don't know, maybe it wasn't Greg that wrote this one. We know Trump will continue using the levers of government to bury the truth about the last election and rig the next one in his favor, because that is already happening. And this, I guess, comes out of, it is Greg Sargent, his piece from November 19th entitled, How a Mangled Nancy Pelosi Quote Illustrates the Ukraine Scandal. I think I will opt not to actually explore that in full. Our point, I think, having been made, and I've reminded you of who it was who was responsible for the analogies, and we'll move on from there. Let's see. Let me just check this, make sure that it's available for our summary later on, and move on to the next stage of the plan. I did open up, and I think Adam intended for us not to click on the National Review article, but maybe we'll begin with his rebuttal of the rebuttal that I saw being circulated this morning. Now, as I said, the National Review and as he points out in his first tweet, has responded to his piece with a piece entitled, "Anti-Majoritarianism Isn't Un-American." Okay, that's fine as an idea. And I think we all get that. Why that headline? It harkens back to Adam's last paragraph, last sentence in the whole thing. Second to last sentence in the whole thing. Anyway, which calls the whole thing, the whole rebuttal into question, if that's the part you're rebutting. It went like this. This may have little meaning to the minority of Americans who have decided that Trump is the only legitimate vessel of popular will, and that the only legitimate election is one that ends with Trump's victory, right? That the high crime that the president has committed is not against Ukraine, but against America. But his supporters won't care. That this won't have any meaning to a minority of Americans who have decided that Trump is the only legitimate vessel of popular will. And the actual rebuttal to this whole piece is, well, maybe we should be listening to a minority because we're all about minority rights and allowing a minority to be heard in this country. Anti-majoritarianism isn't, by definition, anti-American. It's very American to listen to the voices of minorities. Not they wouldn't say that. What they would mean is that we need to listen to minority viewpoints. They don't want to listen to minorities. They view that as a very different thing. Anyway, yes. So why is this up here? We got to get rid of that. I went and looked up and opened up, I thought, somewhere here, but now I appear to have lost it. Maybe that was what was triggering the weird Adobe Flash update message I was getting. But let's go and see if we can. Maybe we shouldn't even bother it's a bad idea probably to read the National Review article. Probably a waste of time. And in fact, this will require a little mental exercise, but I'm sure you're up to it. We'll just go straight to Adam's rebuttal of it, because that's the important part of it, I think. Before we launch into it, I see Mike Musson once again commenting, it's like one side getting caught committing war crimes and the international powers saying, let's let the victor write history. Oh, wait, bad example. Yes, that's true. Because, of course, we're operating there outside of politics, although I think is it a von Clausewitz quote that's attributed to him that war is politics by other means? I think I would dispute that a little bit. War is not politics at all. It's politics by other means. It's achieving your end by means other than politics. I don't know. I guess limited warfare conducted by the internationally recognized laws of war, you might have a better argument there in saying that it's politics by other means, and it really is. I guess nuclear war would be, that's just completely outside politics. There's clearly no rules there. All right. So let's go right to the treatment Adam gives to this article. Anti-majoritarianism isn't un-American. It's somebody I've never heard of here. David Harsanyi. Harsany. I'm squinting to read it off of the screenshot that Adam included here. And he says, here is a delightful exercise in conservative straw manning, which lets us know that it would have been a waste of our time to read the entirety of the article. Obviously, there are important counter-majoritarian elements of Madisonian democracy needed to preserve minority rights. None of those are part of the case for impeaching Trump. Good point, right? They're saying, well, look at what Serwer said. You can't just listen to a minority about who insists that there's nothing wrong with what Trump did and that he's the only legitimate arbiter of Americanism. Sure you can. You can ignore that very easily. But, we have a great tradition of listening to minority viewpoints and protecting the viewpoints of the minority in this country. Why just look at the filibuster tradition, as they sometimes said when we were fighting about that, in the Senate. But Adam takes off from there. This graph, he says, grabbed from the National Review article, in euphemism, refers to the right to, quote unquote, right to prosecute political opponents, to use taxpayer dollars to strong-arm foreign countries into implicating political rivals and commit federal crimes with impunity while in office. Let's see what that euphemism is. The paragraph reads here, even setting aside the hypocrisy of Serwer's argument, it simply doesn't pass the smell test. Well, there you go. It's been said. Smell test wasn't passed. So that's it. Everyone knows that's a bad news, right? Doesn't pass the smell test. What's right, or what right, not specifically laid out in the Constitution, do conservatives demand that courts or the president institute for them? The right not to be forced to pay for someone else's abortion or contraception? What special powers do social conservatives want to give Trump that other presidents haven't always enjoyed? The ability to fire his subordinates? The ability to conduct foreign policy? Well, that's not what's happening here, of course. Adam continues, none of those are about checks on unlimited power or protecting the rights of minorities of any stripe. They're simply abuses of power. They're not counter-majoritarian. They are anti-democracy because they involve the state using its power to criminalize opposition. And quoting here, presidents should be able to decide elections by extorting foreign powers into framing opponents with sham charges. He's not quoting the National Review article. He's simply formulating he's laying out a form of the argument that they're essentially making, as he says in euphemism. But they're essentially saying presidents should be able to decide elections by extorting foreign powers into framing opponents with sham charges. And that is a less defensible position than saying you're, quote unquote, making foreign policy, which is why he employs euphemism and why I addressed that disingenuous spin in the piece he's supposedly responding to. They can't defend what the president is doing, so Trump toadies will pretend he's doing something else. The rest of us don't have to pretend. And that's an excellent point here. I guess what the point of the National Review article is to say, well, basically to reiterate, to restate the same argument that he was actually refuting in the first place. Well, the president wasn't criming, he was making foreign policy. Well, I guess this brings us back to the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago of why there is a process, a regular process for the determination of American foreign policy. Why so many people have a hand in it. Why there are requirements for open decision making. Why there is a role for it, for the legislative branch in reviewing or even helping shape the direction of foreign policy. Why we split all that responsibility up and put it in many hands as an anti-corruption device, and why there are so many triggers along the way that if this thing happens or if this thing does not happen, if we don't go through this process and get the buy-in of all of these various stakeholders in the foreign policy mechanism, whatever policy it is, has its own set of stakeholders. And if we don't check those boxes off along the way and find some overt mechanism by which they have to register their support for the policy going forward, even if they are in disagreement with it, or even if individual stakeholders in the system are in disagreement with it, they are outvoted perhaps in the legislature or wherever else. But all of these boxes need to be checked off. All of these checkpoints have to be passed in the race towards formulating policy. Else it is an implicit admission that the policy itself has either been put together arbitrarily and capriciously, or at the minimum carries the appearance of impropriety, which in ordinary times is enough to sink it as a policy and undermine the legitimacy of the person proposing it all by itself. And that's currently where we stand. All right. So I mentioned also that there was some legitimate, semi-legitimate reason to bring up the name of the odious Matt Gaetz as well. And that brings us, well, to our third break and gives us the opportunity to line that up on the other side. You can imagine, you probably already have, that the reason he's being brought up is to prove the negative here. What is it that rank-and-file Republicans like Gates think about all this? Well, Adam and Serwer told you pretty much how they were going to be approaching these things, but we'll take one specific formulation and refute it on the other side of this 2-minute break. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's continue on here. We were going to invoke the name of Matt Gaetz at some point. And let's see. I opened it up. I found the thing here. Gaetz tweeting, I guess yesterday. Once again over the impeachment issue here. Nancy Pelosi, he writes, and other House Democrats overestimated the extent to which whatever allegations they're making about the Ukraine, really are central to the decisions made by the people who are our bosses. He links to an Epoch Times story here, and we know all about the Epoch Times and how ridiculous it is to even rely on them as a source, but okay, that's what he's doing. The Epoch Times story is about him, Gaetz, saying that Hunter Biden and the whistleblower would likely be witnesses in the impeachment inquiry. I don't know how likely that actually is, but very interesting too. So I guess they set themselves up for success there. The Epoch Times got themselves quoted on Twitter by Matt Gaetz because they wrote a story about what Matt Gaetz is saying. So that got his attention. So what does he use it to say? That Pelosi and Democrats are overestimating the extent to which whatever they're saying about Ukraine is really central to the decisions made by the people who are our bosses. In other words, people don't care about that. My constituency doesn't care about what happened to Ukraine. They may even adopt the Tucker Carlson position that they're pro-Russia, or they might not care at all. And we ought not to care because people don't care about it. And you know, it's interesting. That's an approach that you can take to these things. But Matt Gaetz is a, dim-witted guy, so it might not surprise you that he's not exploring this thing fully. It's his view, in other words, and, it's got enough government, political science mumbo-jumbo in there and ends in saying the people, after all, are our bosses. And in his district, the people are pro-Trump, and so they will view this as a sound political science argument for supporting Gaetz in his position that there is nothing impeachable here and that it's wrong on the part of the Democrats even to bring it up, and that the Democrats will suffer as well because people in their districts likewise don't care about this thing. It's actually the opposite, and that's why those districts have elected Democrats and his district elects even a dim-witted Republican, but whatever. However, there's a larger point at stake here. Not that I ever would think that Matt Gaetz would be able to wrap his head around it, but I thought I might point it out anyway. Yes, it's true that people in your district are willing to say they don't care about this thing. And yes, it's true for the moment. Well, I guess I should say they don't care about this thing because they're pro-Trump. They would care about this thing if a Democrat was doing it. It would be the worst crime in the world if a Democrat was doing it. Likewise, Matt Gaetz believes the same. But even if he didn't, even if he were truly an empty vessel, he would say perhaps, well, the people of my district have spoken. They don't care about this because a Republican is doing it. I likewise will not care about it. Not because a Republican is doing it, let's say, but because I am taking instructions from the people who are my boss here. Well, I thought it was important to point out that the things that are happening here aren't supposed to be central to your decision making or their decision making based on whether or not they're boring, right? They're supposed to really be central to your decisions as the representative in this case. And the question you're supposed to be asking yourself is it okay with me as a legislator, as a member of the Article 1 legislative branch? Is it okay with me that the president, Article 2 branch, without notice or explanation, thwarts the appropriations power, the purse strings power of the legislature? I'm supposed to be, remember, if you've read your, Federalist Papers, right? We're supposed to be jealously guarding our prerogatives here. The power of the purse belongs to the legislature. Is it okay with me that we have a president who says, the power of the purse does not belong to you? He cancels your expenditures when you affirmatively make them, and he makes expenditures that you've affirmatively canceled. Right? The Congress as a whole appropriated money for aid to Ukraine. The president, again, without notice or explanation, says arbitrarily, the money that you've appropriated will not be spent. It's not happening. You have the power of the purse. I'm just saying I am taking that power from you. The money you sent to Ukraine won't be sent. Now, could he do it in a legitimate fashion? Yes, right? All he really needed to do was provide notice and give the Congress the opportunity to look into what he was doing honestly and openly and decide, are you that upset about corruption? Can you make the case that contra what your own State Department and Pentagon are saying, that the corruption is really more of a problem than these bureaucrats are acknowledging, and I'm having an open fight about their interpretation of what corruption is and how much of it there is in Ukraine? Yes, but then it has to be an open fight, and there would be an open vote on whether you're right or not. But you didn't do that because you knew that you weren't really talking about legitimate corruption. You were just holding out for the hope that Ukraine would declare Biden corrupt for you. That's not the same thing. As far as the other side of the equation here, spending money that you've affirmatively withheld. Was there money for the wall construction? No, there wasn't. Did he steal it from elsewhere? Yes, he did. Can he do that? Yes, in many cases he can. He can reprogram funds from in limited, a limited amount of funds can be reprogrammed on a presidential say-so. But again, there has to be notice and explanation. And in this case, they actually tried to provide it. They certainly gave notice. The explanation was lacking. The explanation was, national emergency. I've declared a national emergency. Which, was a little bit, I guess, to harken back to those sports analogies, right? Are you allowed to intercept the plays of the other team? Well, in national emergency, you can, and I just declared it one. Again, there probably ought to be some, I guess, for lack of a better forum for this, judicial determination about whether or not the explanation was sufficient, but I don't know if the courts are really going to be thrilled about doing that. But again, the point is he made some attempt at complying with the rules that would allow this otherwise arbitrary or capricious looking exercise of unilateral power okay. The Congress collectively, with lots of hands on the levers, is supposed to control the purse strings. The president isn't supposed to be able to upend that unilaterally, but there are certain circumstances in which we might recognize his ability to do that, so long as he provides notice and explanation that's debatable and reversible to the legislature. He sort of kind of made that effort on the wall, but not really. He absolutely avoided it entirely and on purpose with respect to Ukraine. So the real question here is supposed to be, according to the Federalist Papers, right? And that's supposed to mean something to us, that you're not supposed to endorse that as a member of the legislature, no matter what party you're in. But I recognize that a dim-witted idiot like Matt Gaetz, and maybe even some smarter people, are likely to come down differently because of the particular circumstances here. If you ask Matt Gaetz straight up, is it okay with you that the president, without notice or explanation, cancels congressional expenditures in Ukraine, duly authorized and appropriated monies? And is it okay with you that when the Congress expresses its collective will that there ought not to be an appropriation made for wall construction, that he constructs it anyway by stealing money, in this instance, from, among other things, military construction budget to house troops on military bases? But forget what the money is taken from. The principle should be the same no matter where you take the money from. If you ask Matt Gaetz that, he will without hesitation, and quite honestly, I think, say, yes, it's okay with me that the president, without notice or explanation, cancels expenditures that the Congress has made for security in Ukraine. And yes, it's okay with me that without notice or explanation, the president diverts monies that the Congress collectively has appropriated for military construction or any other purpose and instead uses it on the wall. Why is it okay with me? Because I personally believe the president's explanation for what happened in Ukraine, even though it's dumb and easily disprovable on its face, and I support the wall. In other words, these two outcomes are politically or ideologically or both good for me. So is it okay with me that the chief executive does these two things? Yes. The real question, of course, is supposed to be, and Matt Gaetz's mind just can't get to this level, I don't think. The real question, although I think he went to law school. But, people can make it through law school on a variety of different levels. But the real question is supposed to be your responsibility as a federal representative in Congress is supposed to be that you're supposed to be able to imagine, what if I didn't support these things personally, politically, ideologically? What would it mean if instead of Donald Trump doing it, Barack Obama did it? And I guess I should probably just stop there. Forget explaining what they did or why they did it. The fact that Barack Obama did it means Matt Gaetz opposes it. But suppose he did the same thing. Suppose somehow, magically, Barack Obama says, I'm stopping money being sent to Ukraine because I think they're corrupt, and I'm taking money from military construction and using it to build a border wall. We probably don't even have very much trouble imagining Matt Gaetz saying, I oppose those things. You can't just do that. You can't just be a dictator, Barack Obama. We appropriated this money collectively in these ways, and you're undoing it. That's unconstitutional. You're a tyrant and a dictator. Even if he actually did stop and think, maybe I would like a wall. If it was Obama's wall, he wouldn't like it. I mean, I think we all know that about Matt Gaetz and his types of people. But again, the exercise is supposed to be, it shouldn't matter what you think about the activity that the money is being used for so much as, is it right and proper for the president, after all the efforts we've made? And after all, allegedly you worked your tail off in Congress, dragging these policies through these processes. Now, you might not have paid any attention to them. You just voted the way your whip told you to vote. You can do this without effort. It's true. But theoretically, a collective decision was made. And although you opposed the collective decision, you were outvoted. And the majority rules in this sense, because instead of lining up in battlefields and trying to see, well, there are 300 people in this army, and there's 200 people in that army. Which army is going to win? And you all murder yourselves, and then we have to replace you with new representatives, and it's very costly and expensive. We just count the votes instead, and agree to believe that the Congress has done this thing, even if you voted against it. And you're part of the Congress, and you're supposed to take some institutional pride in standing up for that position. But because you're a political animal, and only a political animal, and not a representative of the people, which is what you were claiming a minute ago, you will approve of this kind of anti-constitutional behavior because you like the outcome. So the exercise is supposed to be, imagine you don't, but you can't do that. I recognize that, but I thought I should point that out for everybody, just how far from fulfilling the oath of office, the obligation of public representation in a republic, that we're getting, how far off the mark people like Matt Gaetz really are. And it's not like other people can't fall prey to this. It happens all the time. This is just particularly egregious and particularly dangerous, I think. So I just thought I would point some of those things out. Okay, jumping back into Pocket, trying to wrap up today's program by bringing you some of the other important items that have been socked away, and we can eliminate them from the top layer of Pocket. Greg sent me this one. This is important by way of preview. Something from Talking Points memo. Judiciary GOP attack plan will look different than Nunes's conspiracy-heavy approach. That seems wise. We'll see what they've got. Nicole LaFond writing this piece for TPM. House Judiciary Republicans plan to take a different approach to impeachment proceedings this week, ditching the conspiracy-laced tactics followed by House Intelligence Committee ranking member Devin Nunes. According to Politico Playbook, House Judiciary Committee ranking member Doug Collins of Georgia will lead the Republicans' counterpunch efforts by forcing Jerry Nadler into a slew of procedural fights. Not that much better, really. Harping on the legal definition of terms like bribery. Republicans reportedly believe that Nadler will be a bit easier to rattle than House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff. We'll see. The minority members also plan to rely heavily on attack dogs like Representative Jim Jordan and John Ratcliffe, who are on the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees, sometimes artificially. Jordan was recruited last minute to join the Intelligence Committee because of his track record as a public defender of President Trump. Collins is expected to be the main press liaison, Playbook reported. Republicans also plan to continue criticizing the process House Democrats have followed for the impeachment inquiry. And they usually say if you're debating process, you're losing. And they are. While Republicans are allowed to bring in one witness for the Judiciary Committee hearings, they plan to complain about ignored requests to bring in fact witnesses before the Intelligence Committee. They'll also try to discredit Schiff's report on the Intelligence Committee's findings, arguing that the process is unfair. Well, I'd wish you good luck on that one, but I'd only be wishing you good luck, ironically, tongue-in-cheek, because I think you'll fail. But I'm not even going to bother with that cover. Bad luck. I wish you bad luck with your endeavors. Okay, let's see. By the way, also a question hanging out there that I've gotten by way of email from listeners. I had hinted in response to their complaint, and a very valid one, that Democrats still seemed in the House. Democrats in the House still seemed to be convinced that the best idea was moving quickly, getting right to an impeachment proceeding as soon as possible, limiting it to Ukraine, etc. There is at least the thread of hope hanging out there. Don't know how likely it is, but Washington Post reporting Democrats quietly debate expanding impeachment articles beyond Ukraine. Rachel Bade reporting that yesterday. House Dems debating whether to expand impeachment to include actual articles of impeachment, to include charges beyond the Ukraine controversy, setting up a potential internal clash as the party races, for some reason, to impeach President Trump by Christmas time. Members of the Judiciary Committee and other more liberal-minded lawmakers and congressional aides have been privately discussing the possibility of drafting articles that include obstruction of justice, or other high crimes they believe are clearly outlined in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report, or allegations that Trump has used his office to benefit his bottom line. Emoluments would be a good place to start on that. The idea, however, is running into resistance from some moderate Dems wary of impeachment blowback in their GOP-leaning districts, as well as Dem leaders who sought to keep impeachment narrowly focused on Ukraine. The debate's expected to play out in leadership and caucus meetings this week as the House Intelligence Committee prepares to hand the impeachment inquiry to judiciary. Intel is scheduled to vote Tuesday night, tonight, on its final report on Ukraine, allowing judiciary to then work on writing articles of impeachment based on that. But the Judiciary Committee has also asked other investigative panels to send any findings of Trump-related misdeeds that they believe are impeachable. And many of the committee members are hoping articles will refer to and cite their own months-long investigation into the Mueller report, which described 10 possible instances of obstruction by the president. A couple of comments made there. I just want to point that all out to you, let you read the comments perhaps on your own so we can get to a couple other subjects. But there is a thin reed of hope out there that there might be a broader inquiry. Other news. Breaking yesterday, I'll read you the report on it from The Hill, even though many of you hate The Hill. And we all know that they're not the most reliable source in the world, but I think sometimes, in some cases, for straight news, they're not bad in reflecting, usually when they aggregate from other sources, or even when they do it themselves, if there's a straight up brief report like there is here. Here's your headline. Judge denies request for stay on McGahn testimony. Justine Coleman, writing this piece, a U.S. District Judge, denied the Justice Department's request for a stay on testimony from former White House counsel Don McGahn. U.S. District Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, remember, wrote in a 17-page opinion, herein linked, that a long-term stay on her opinion last week requiring McGahn to testify in front of the House Judiciary Committee could cause, quote, grave harm to the investigation. Now, I'm sure that Trump will be appealing that on the grounds that the the refusal to grant the stay was an error. But this is where we stand now. This court has no doubt that further delay of the Judiciary Committee's enforcement of its valid subpoena causes grave harm to both the committee's investigation and the interests of the public more broadly, Jackson wrote. The judge, who was appointed by former President Obama, also decided to remove a temporary stay that she'd agreed to last week while the case moved up to the U.S. Court of Appeals. The Justice Department was advocating for a long-term stay. She added that the Department of Justice's chances of winning the appeal were, quote, exceedingly low. DOJ also does not and cannot deny that whatever additional information that the committee and the public might glean from McGahn's live testimony will be lost if the Judiciary Committee does not have an opportunity to question him prior to any House vote on impeachment. Hill reached out to the Justice Department for comment. Jackson decided last week that the president could not prevent McGahn from testifying and being subject to congressional oversight because history shows presidents are not kings. The January 3rd hearing with a 3-judge panel has been scheduled for the DOJ's appeal. 2 of those judges were appointed by Republican presidents, Politico reported. The department said it would bring the request to the Supreme Court if necessary. Chief Justice John Roberts could grant a temporary stay against the subpoena, but 5 justices would need to support a longer stay for it to go into effect, according to Politico. Former Special Counsel Mueller's report published in April, you know all about it. It detailed McGahn's knowledge about the president's alleged efforts to stop the Russia investigation. McGahn's testimony could also help Democrats determine if they want to include Mueller report accusations in the articles of impeachment. So important bit there. We'll see how that plays out over the next couple of days as well. Let's see. Couple of other items that we might be able to sneak in here. There's, for instance, more news about our friends Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. Perhaps we'll take a quick look at that. NBC News reporting late last night, I think. Prosecutor says new charges likely in the case against the Rudy Giuliani associates. The disclosure was made during a court hearing in New York related to the case of Parnas and Fruman. Tom Winter, Rich Shapiro, I get the byline on yesterday's news from NBC. The Justice Department is likely to file additional charges in the case against these two. The disclosure was made in New York, as we said yesterday. The federal prosecutor didn't offer any further details on the nature or target of additional charges, so it could be Giuliani himself, I guess. Parnas and Fruman, as you know, charged with violating campaign finance laws, pleaded not guilty, arrested with one-way tickets to Vienna at Dulles Airport on October 9th. The indictment then unsealed was about, of course, the $325,000 sent to the, America First Action PAC. Of course, no word on the actual origins of that money. And not much more here beyond, I guess, some comments from the lawyers, and but no real hints as to what those additional charges may be. Just the fact that when they're in court, federal prosecutors are talking about charging perhaps more people, or at the very least, charging Parnas and Fruman with more crimes along the way. Let's see. Other important and short-ish items, I think. We'll have time maybe to at least take note of this one. A new batch of documents released from the Mueller report. Also, NBC News is reporting here. Newly released documents shed light on Mueller-Trump meeting. Yes, right. This goes... There's a new batch of documents out that people are searching through to find yet more nuggets, but this piece in particular was interesting. Bring us back to something earlier mentioned in the show. Trump and paperwork, man. Never take his word for anything. Yet another entry. There's about 5 from today, but we got this one. Newly released documents shed light on Trump-Mueller meeting. Trump has claimed Mueller applied to be FBI director and was, quote, turned down. You remember that story? But the documents don't back up the president's version of events. Documents will never back up the president's version of any event, by the way. He doesn't read them, and he's a gigantic liar and a thief. So you can just make that assumption right off the bat. Dara Gregorian reporting former special counsel Robert Mueller had taken himself out of the running to be FBI director by the time he met with Donald Trump about the job. Former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein told federal investigators. Notes from Rosenstein's May 23, 2017 interview were made public on Monday as a result of a court ruling in BuzzFeed News' Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the Justice Department. So the larger story, another trove of documents. The first story gleaned from this second trove of documents is this one. This document sheds new light on the circumstances of Trump's May 16, 2017 meeting with Mueller in the Oval Office. Trump has claimed that Mueller applied for the suddenly vacant job of FBI director in that meeting, and he turned him down. I turned him down. I said, no, I won't accept you. The next day, Mueller was named special counsel, investigating links between, well, you know what he was doing. In the interview, according to the notes published by BuzzFeed News, Rosenstein described feeling angry, ashamed, horrified, and embarrassed at how the abrupt firing of then FBI Director James Comey on May 9th, 2017 was handled. It was also humiliating for Comey, his interviewers quoted Rosenstein as saying. Rosenstein said he spoke to Mueller, a former FBI director, about becoming special counsel the next day. He had a separate conversation with Mueller and then Attorney General Jeff Sessions on May 13th to see if Mueller would be interested in returning to his old job as director, the notes say. Mueller informed them he did not want to be interviewed for FBI director position, but told them about his views about what should be done with the FBI, the document says. Sessions thought Mueller's comments were brilliant, Rosenstein was quoted as saying. Nevertheless, Mueller was placed on the White House's list of potential candidates for FBI director. Mueller was interviewed for the position of FBI director, but later decided to withdraw from consideration, the notes say. He was officially named special counsel on May 17th. Trump, who often decried Mueller's investigation as a witch hunt, has used the Oval Office meeting to suggest that Mueller had a conflict of interest and that he was lying about their conversation. But as it turns out, of course, He's the one who was lying about their conversation. No surprise to anyone. And when that didn't work, by the way, the legal genius in residence at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue decided that a legitimate reason that Mueller should be conflicted out of the job was that in 2011 he quit the Trump National Golf Club because it was too far away from his home and he didn't want to travel all the way out there to play golf. And that's obviously too much of a conflict of interest. So just keep in mind every time he's claiming absolute rights because he understands the Constitution better than you do, he's also the guy who said, well, once he left my golf club. So that's a conflict. Anyway, do stay tuned. Thanks for hanging in there today. Justice Putnam comes up next, of course, with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Lots to contribute to the fuller picture when we come back. Let's see. Here's a couple of things here that might be of interest to you because they're about impeachment. What do you know?
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Yes, and I'm glad that Justice is going to take this one up because a bigger picture item than all of what we discussed so far is the extent to which Republican members of Congress are willing to live in fantasy land under an alternative reality and pretend they believe things that are absolutely not the case. Lots of them are doing it. Stay tuned.